is not a time to be dismayed. This is punk rock time. This is what Joe Strummer trained you for. It is now time to go. You're a good person. That means more now than ever.
I know there are a lot of devastating things going on right now, and this video may seem trivial on some level, but I want to talk about something real that I think translates to a lot of the issues that we face every day. When we are unafraid to look different, to speak up, and to be proud of our convictions, we are better equipped to resist fascism. The disconnect between aesthetics and awareness can lead to a populace that is easily controlled by manufactured consent and ahistorical lies. The removal of symbolism and anti-intellectualism is intentional to weaken our coalitions. Rebellion becomes a costume instead of a consciousness, and we have to sit with this and fix it as soon as possible. This type of disconnect is why people assume a one-day protest or boycott will solve our issues, or that protests themselves should be kid-friendly and include bouncy houses and babysitting. Protesting was never about comfort, just like punk was never about safety pins and ripped shirts only. It was intentional rebellion against the powers that be: racism, capitalism, fascism, and conformity. Punk is born out of working class rage and feelings of being anti-establishment. It is fueled by DIY ethics and values. Punk gave voice to the misfits, the marginalized, and the pissed off. But in today's internet culture, where everything is content and nothing is sacred, younger people and the uninformed are exposed to punk aesthetics without any of its roots, culture, or history. This unfortunately creates a dangerous gap where rebellion is mimicked but not lived, and even racism, misogyny, and other forms of bigotry are passed off as just edgy humor and not that deep. The allowance of apolitical actors, in my opinion, are why we have so many centrists and conservatives in punk right now, as well as hardcore and all the other surrounding scene. Y'all, not everything is so politicaled yourself into a corner, surrounded by people with the worst opinions and the worst behaviors, because you did not protect the marginalized voices that said things that you did not like. There's a reason that Paul Ryan, that congressman, thinks Rage Against the Machine is his favorite band, and he's literally a fascist Republican. It's all of our fault, collectively, for not gatekeeping. But I'm being dead serious. I think now, more importantly than ever, that we need a real punk and skinhead revival, where we honor the true legacy of punk and reconnect with the radical roots and the subcultures that I was drawn to in the first place. I was drawn to punk solely because of the politics. It gave my politics a uniform, not the other way around. People being apolitical leads to people making up their own punk history and information, and it has made me feel like an angry, grumpy old man, so I'm writing this script for this video. I wanted to talk about a few specific bands, a few specific songs, and why punk has always been political, why it's important to stand up for what is true in the scene, yesterday and today. Remembering the history isn't an option, it's essential. In late 70s Britain, the UK was in economic crisis. There was mass unemployment, around 3 million people at the peak, which was mostly working class youth and immigrants. Far-right groups like the National Front were gaining in popularity for their populism and spewing off white nationalist rhetoric.
In 1968, Enoch Powell, he made something called the Rivers of Blood speech.
In 15 or 20 years' time, the black man will have the whip hand over the white man.
Before that speech, me and my friends were all getting on in the playground. The minute he dropped that statement, the whole landscape changed. Politics came into play. All of a sudden, I wasn't their mate Letzi, I was you black bastard. And life was never the same after that.
They blamed unemployment on immigrants, queer people, and anyone living an alternative lifestyle to the typical white Protestant British family. Police violence and racist immigrant policies targeted Black and South Asian communities specifically. As mentioned in the last video, working class white youth and second generation Black and brown immigrants were somehow finding common ground through this turmoil with reggae, ska, punk, and fashion, something that united and aligned them all together. We spoke about the Clash last time, but let's dive in a little bit deeper. This script is coming about because someone on TikTok said that original punk was never intentionally political and that fascists led the way to popularity essentially. They were speaking about bands like the Sex Pistols using fascist imagery and wearing swastikas. I immediately got hot with anger though at the grand generalization of that and started listening to White Riot by The Clash. The Clash wrote White Riot because of the Notting Hill Carnival riots.
That day, the riot at Notting Hill Carnival, oh man, I've never been so frightened in my life. Police just was running through the crowd and hitting people. I didn't know what happened. People just started rioting.
That riot actually started around the arrest of a pickpocket, or the attempted arrest of a pickpocket. And the cops jumped in somewhat heavy-handedly, but it wasn't really about the pickpocket. What it was really about was the bullshit that we'd had to put up with the whole rest of the year. This tension was bubbling. You know, it was like a pressure cooker that had to go off. Truth is, we were looking for any excuse to let it out, man. And it might sound like a weird thing to say, but it was a beautiful day.
This song was written in solidarity. Joe Strummer and Mick Jones were there at Notting Hill when it happened. The song is not about white pride, which is often misconstrued by racists and dumbasses alike. It's a provocation aimed at apathetic and apolitical white kids.
Black man got a lot of problems, but they don't mind on the break. White people go to school, but they teach you how to be fake.
Black men got a lot of problems, but they don't mind throwing a brick. White people go to school where they teach you how to be thick.
English idioms and meanings. Idiom.
Tick in the head.
Meaning.
Stupid or foolish.
It was a call to action. If black communities are rising up, white working class kids should too in solidarity, not in entitlement. And they wrote that in 1977. The Clash's discography shows that they were always more than just a band, but deep thinkers and politically aware. London Calling is a song about Cold War dread, global warming, nuclear fear, and working class decay.
London calling to the underworld. Come out of the cupboard, you boys and girls. London calling, now don't look to us. Phony Beatlemania has bitten the dust. London calling, see we ain't got no swing, except for the rain and the crunch of thing. The ice is coming, the sun's zooming in. Meltdown expected, the wheat is good in. engine stuck on him. But I have no fear, 'cause London is drowning. I live by the river.
Clampdown is an anti-authoritarian anthem about youths becoming co-opted into the system and becoming normies. Know Your Rights is a sarcastic song about our civil liberties being under threat. Spanish Bombs is a tribute song to anti-fascist fighters in the Spanish Civil War. Straight to Hell was an anti-Vietnam War song. In the Rock the Casbah music video, they were provocative enough to showcase an Arab man and an Israeli man dancing and riding together in a car. The class's integration of reggae, dub, funk, and hip-hop were also political. Younger generations often take for granted the fact that we're integrated and together now and people listen to whatever they want. But back then, it was not like that. The youth cultures brought people together. Punk and hip-hop were being spawned at the same time from the same working class anger. When bands like The Clash did covers of reggae songs or tried rapping on songs like Radio Clash, it was an endorsement of the culture and a move of solidarity. They had a real respect for anti-colonial resistance, intersectionality, and black music. And if you don't think so, you haven't paid attention to any of The Clash's work. Like at all. And it wasn't just The Clash.
Hello, mate, all right? Yeah, I'm all right.
Being political and active as a punk in the early days was not an anomaly. With bands like Sham 69, working class punks, and anti-capitalism became way more a part of the lyrical zeitgeist of punk. They came from Hersham, a working class suburb, and grew up in estates. Estates for all non-Brits are similar to housing projects in America. Jimmy Percy, the frontman, was always politically brave and interested in unity. The National Front really ruined punk and skinhead culture for a while. At every show, at every club, fights would break out. The anti-racist skinheads would fight the Nazi skinheads, and full-on brawls would happen. People got stabbed or worse. Jimmy Percy himself was attacked and threatened by Nazi skinheads for having black and white unity in his shows, or for being openly against the National Front.
Hold up! Hang on! Oi! Oi!
Sham 69 concerts were disrupted by National Front and British movement skinheads after Jimmy Percy sort of came out on the anti-racist side. So it became, if you like, a catalyst for the skinheads to show their disapproval of what they saw as Jimmy Percy's sellout of what they saw as being the true skinhead thing.
When Sham 69 had their last stand, a terrible gig at the Rainbow, it was that lot, all of them who caused it. And even though there was only 40 of them, they got a bigger mob around them, and that's what caused that chaos. And that was a terrible time for Jimmy Percy.
What can I do? I mean, I do it for you. If you trust me, I would have trusted you.
This 40 managed to get about 200 of the audience running around in packs, terrorising people, and then they invaded the stage and there's Z-Guy and all this old crap. It was horrible, absolutely horrible. The worst gig up to that point I'd ever seen.
When people bring themselves out into the daylight, it's a completely different way of looking at things, isn't it? So that's what it did for me. It put a total value to their stupidity, do you understand, of saying, thank God you've done that, because now I can also go, look, do you really think I want to play to that? That's why it was the last. Do you really think I've got anything to do with this trash?
He wrote If the Kids Are United as a song of bravery, solidarity, and empowerment for the anti-racist punks and skinheads involved in the scene. Their band's shows would often get co-opted by Nazis who often infiltrated their gigs. Sham 69 had a genuine desire to reclaim punk for the people.
Sham had an upsurgence in working class people so much wanting something else and something new and something that they could feel that was a punk band.
When Sham come along, they were like the champions in their own eyes of the underdogs, and so a lot of kids gravitated towards them.
I gave them a way into punk that they did not have outside of that. Their whole thing is not about being experimental, it is a structure.
And I think what Sham did is they took that whole terrorist chant thing and they tried to reinvent themselves. And I think they'd have done it and been much more successful if they hadn't been destroyed by the politics.
You're a fool if you do!
By the late 70s, right-wing politicians, they realised that there was an army who'd fight for them. Do you know what I mean?
They saw a way of, say, recruitment at our gigs. The lost souls of whoever they were, in the weakness of whoever they were, could far more easily be contained and brought about into their party through a Sham 69 gig than probably any other gig they could possibly go to. I was very, very quick to recognise this. So therefore, that's why I quickly wanted to play the Rock Against Racism gig at any of them, to show straight away that I was an ally to the theme of Rock Against Racism than I ever was, do you understand, to their other event.
And so did a lot of people. In 1976, Eric Clapton went on a racist rant in support of Enoch Powell, who was an extreme right-wing member of parliament that wanted to deport all black immigrants back to their home countries. Like everybody. A not-so-fun fact that I learned during some of my research with this is that the history of calling Caribbean black people cat and dog eaters is not new and was often used in Britain as well in racial terrorism. History repeats itself, unfortunately, which is why I think this video has some importance. Musicians all over Britain were pissed about Eric Clapton doing that and wanted to explicitly show their solidarity and support of black British people, as well as all other immigrants affected by the National Front and their open white supremacy. This helped form Rock Against Racism.
We were in the Cartoon Clowns manifestation by then, and we were at rehearsal in my studio in Soho. We used it as rehearsal base. We had a band and everything. We had a band in those days. So we had a band, we had the theatre group and everything. And it was a lovely big place and we could store all the kit. And we were rehearsing and someone came in with a melody maker. And they said, "Have you read this shit about Clapton?" We went, "No, what's all that?" So they told us, "No, Eric Clapton's done a concert in Birmingham where he said he supports Enoch Powell. He thinks Powell should be the Prime Minister. He thinks the WOG should get out and the Paki should go," and on and on and on. And we're going, "That can't be impossible. No, it can't be right." So we look again, and then next week it's in New Musical Express, and then it's all out. So we're looking at this. I mean, I was a fan of this music. I'd been to see Blind Faith. I had Clapton's albums. You know what I mean? I was a big fan. And I'd seen him in the early days when I was doing my 2 and 6pence a night, collecting empty Coke bottles at the Marquee Club. He was a young musician, sort of Cyril Davis All-Stars or early versions of Jeff Beck or whatever, you know. All those young musicians, it was the Marquee where they earned their spurs. So I couldn't believe it. So anyway, the more we read about it, and it was real, it had happened, you know. I disbelief turned into anger, you know, and I said, "This is just fucking ridiculous." And so I did something I'd never done before in my life. I wrote a letter. I thought, I'm going to write a fucking letter to the music press. You know, I'm going to write saying, "What an arsehole, this is ridiculous." And so I wrote a letter.
Would you read these?
Yeah, I'll read the letter. So it was after rehearsal. We sat down and went, "We'll write this letter." So when we read about Eric Clapton's Birmingham concert, when he urged support for Enoch Powell, we nearly puked. "What's going on, Eric? You've got a touch of brain damage, mate. So you're going to stand up for us and you think we're being colonialised by black people? Come on, you've been taking too much of that Daily Express stuff. You know you can't handle it. Own up, half your music is black. You're rock music's biggest colonialist. You're a good musician, but where would you be without the blues and R&B? You've got to fight the racist poison, otherwise you degenerate into the sewer with the rats and all the money men that ripped off rock culture with their checkbooks and plastic crap. Rock was and can still be a real progressive culture, not a packaged mail-order stick-on nightmare of mediocre garbage. Keep the faith. Black and white, unite and fight. We want to organise a rank-and-file movement against the racist poison in rock music. We urge support. All those interested, write to Rock Against Racism, Box M, 6 Cotton Gardens, London E2. P.S. Who shot the sheriff, Eric? Sure as hell wasn't you, mate. September 1976.
Punk bands like The Clash, Sham 69, and X-Ray Specs played in a bold political move that honestly put them in danger. While the National Front was smaller in comparison to the larger population, there was a time where hundreds of Nazi skinheads and Nazi punks went to shows, in Britain specifically. In the States, they had a presence, but it was smaller. Punk, ska, and all the related genres were considered youth culture, and as I always say, Nazis have no drip, and they often have to steal what they cannot replicate.
What happened at Southall was the locals were obviously had been wound up by someone about the fact that skinheads, and as well as other kids, were coming to this gig, and they took it as an affront, and it was a massive attack on the gig with kids throwing petrol bombs.
It kicked all off. The pub got burnt down. This made major news across the country. Margaret Thatcher, in her wisdom, said, right, oh yeah, ban that. It's ban oi, right? So that got pulled off the shelf. And then after Southall, most of the good oi bands all folded up. The rejects, all of them were gone. And in their place were small little oi bands, and they were being funded by the right-wing groups, and it just fed this whole monster, really.
So of course the media picked up on that, and every time you then saw someone with the high boots on and the bleached jeans, racist skinhead.
I think the trouble really started up in London with bands like fucking Screwdriver, the out-and-out Nazi fucking bonehead bands. They got into it in a big way, the right-wing thing. I think they could see they could make money, they could play gigs, sell records.
Being part of being a skinhead is to be a nationalist, to be patriotic and proud of your country and proud of your race. There's a lot said about skinheads being started from blacks and these them, but I don't think that's right at all. I mean, I've heard these rude boys or whatever they're called, but I don't consider them to be skinheads anyway. I think skinheads is a white working class thing, really.
So Screwdriver, they started Blood and Honour. What's Blood and Honour about?
Blood and Honour was the sort of prodigy of Screwdriver, really. It was a proper neo-Nazi thing.
We were trying to bring about race warfare. So our job was to basically disrupt the multicultural society, the multiracial society, and make it unworkable, make the various different groups hate each other to such a degree that they couldn't live together. And when they couldn't live together, you end up with that ghettoized, radicalized society from which we hope to rise like the proverbial phoenix from the ashes.
The rise of these right-wing bands led to the formation of Sharp, Skinheads Against Racial Prejudice, spearheaded in the UK by Roddy Moreno.
We were reactionary, so we become like an anti-fascist band. Nothing to do with the country, it was simply because there was fucking boneheads out there making us fucking look bad.
You had to do something, I guess.
Well, if Skinhead was about anything, it was about, don't let people take the piss out of you, do you know what I mean? Be a man up like, do you know what I mean? So when we seen these fucking dickheads dressing up like us and come in with all this Nazi nonsense, we had to stand up and say, no, we're not having none of that.
The Daily Mail tried to paint the whole thing as being this neo-Nazi movement, which it never ever was. And I think that media version was taken up by the media all around the world.
And they often have to steal what they cannot replicate. Fascism is against art, so they have no art to make, if that makes sense. Pauline Black of The Selector has spoken in an interview previously about how Nazi skinheads would come to her shows and skank, and then they would start Zig Heiling. Pauline is a black woman, and her band is multicultural, so it was very shocking to her. But I say that to paint the picture of what was happening at the time. They really thought they could be Nazis and also like ska. They thought that they could support Pauline Black as a black woman and Zig Heil at her show. Fucking weirdos.
You know, if you're playing, you have maybe the first 4 or 5 rows all Zeke Heiling at the stage, at some stage during your set. And you had to deal with that. And the only way that you could deal with it would be to stop the gig. So we used to go off stage and wait for it all to calm down. And then a skinhead ambassador would come upstairs and sort of tap on the door and saying, "You coming back on?" And you go, "No, we're not." You know, all your mates are all Zeke Heiling at us. And you say, "But, well, they don't represent, you know, what we think. There's a whole group of us down there, and we only came along because we love the music and all this kind of thing." So, I mean, what I used to say was, well, go down and talk to them. Convince your other mates, who look exactly the same as you do, that this is, they're at the wrong gig.
It is simply ahistorical and false to say that there was never any pushback against bigotry in the beginning of punk and skinhead cultures. These cultures were born out of diversity. Rock Against Racism was anti-fascist, pro-multicultural, intersectional, and working class, rooted in the Red Wedge era that tried to push leftist politics through youth culture.
This week, a new political force set out across the country. Its weaponry is pop music. Its target, the young voters of Britain. And its message, vote Labour at the next election. It's a new chapter, perhaps a very significant one, in the history of what was once called protest singing. But there is nothing apolitical about what's been happening musically in some of Britain's major cities, in this case Birmingham, in the course of the past week. A nationwide tour by leading groups and leading singers under the banner title Red Wedge in the cause of the Labour Party. It's the first time that a lineup of pop musicians have linked themselves openly with a major political party. But although the link is new, the commitment is not. For many years, some of the leading figures in Red Wedge, like founder member Billy Bragg, have been involved in anti-government protest. Billy Bragg and his colleagues in Red Wedge now have an office at Labour Party headquarters. Towards the end of last year, he left that office on a special mission.
That's the Commons, please, mate.
A short journey with a more distant goal in mind.
The challenge facing young people today, I think, comes almost exclusively from the Conservative government. They seem to regard youth as something that is some sort of disease that we all have to go through, and the sooner it's over, the better. I think popular music offers the opportunity for us to reach an audience of young people not catered for, I don't think, by any of the political parties at the moment.
This was the day for the Westminster launch of the Labour Party's new liaison with the world of pop music.
Go. Pneumonia for socialism. How are you? All right, mate? Nice to see you. It's going to be a bit nippy out here, isn't it?
The Red Wedge banner was unfurled, and the details of this week's tour of Britain were explained.
So what we basically do, we go to Style Council back line. Bass, drums, guitar, a couple of organs, and we're all going to work around that. The communards can use their backline, so that's got to be pretty simple.
Labour's new auxiliaries gave the reasons for their commitment.
There's a different mentality amongst a lot of musicians these days. I don't think they're quite as self-centred as they used to be. And I think that, you know, even they've been affected by the Tories and what the Tories are doing to this country.
I come from a working class background, poor background, so I mean, I understand all these problems. So, and most of my friends are still on the dole. My family's half of my family's on the dole, so I can relate to these problems and important issues to me.
I don't want them to vote Labour because I vote Labour or anybody else does. I just want them to be aware of politics altogether, make their own minds up.
Another reason why that TikTok irked me so bad is because of the bad brains. In the 1970s and the early 80s, black punks in America too were forging their own lanes. Bad Brains first started as a jazz fusion band, which makes a lot of sense to me, since their compositions often flow and progress like a carefree attitude of a jazz song or someone like Miles Davis.
I played the bass originally in a band called Stress, and we used to do folk covers, basically. Earth, Wind & Fire, Parliament Funkadelic.
So me and Gary went to junior high school together, and I introduced Gary to my brother.
I remember meeting Gary at a concert. He asked me, could he play my guitar? And I said, well, sure. And he starts playing all these cool jazz riffs and classical rhythm and blues lines.
You know, H said, yo, man, I want to play music with you. I want to be in a band with you. Kind of wanted more of a challenge. So I said, oh, let me pick up the guitar. H started playing the bass. We should sit down and practice. HR and I would sit down there, fingers be bleeding.
But now Daryl was younger than all of us.
I was in this band called the Young Explorers. We used to play covers of like Earth, Wind & Fire and all that kind of stuff.
We then assured Daryl that he wasn't breaking the law, it wasn't illegal to be a musician.
And Daryl started playing bass, HR started to sing.
Try to play like what we were listening to, you know, Turn to Forever, all this jazz fusion stuff.
Chick Corea and Stanley Clark, George Duke and all those cats.
They brought an unmatched energy to punk, which is why they started being called hardcore, because they were harder than punk, which seemed impossible at the time.
We were walking down to the bayou to see the dam. And here comes this opening band, the Bad Brains. We all went up to the front and had our minds completely blown. We walked out of there going, damn great, but the Bad Brains. At Madam's Organ, remember standing in front of the Bad Brains one night with HR so close I could smell his breath. And I said, I sure hope that guy doesn't land on me. Wham! I'm on my back with HR pinning me to the ground, singing on me. I was like, ah! Whoa! And that was kind of the start of my life.
These were Rastafarians, playing faster and harder than anyone else, even faster than the Ramones, which was considered a pretty fast band at the time. They looked different and dressed different. Since they were Rastas, they often wore their freeform locks and were discriminated against often because they were black musicians playing weird music who also smoked weed. Rastafarians smoked cannabis religiously, so they were being discriminated against. Their song Banned in DC is about the exclusion they experienced in the scene that they helped shape and create in DC. They were banned in DC because of their politics and their race. People were anti-black and harmful to Bad Brains. They experienced actual heavy backlash, and it's why they moved to New York City in the first place.
You started out in DC, and you were there for several years before you made the move to New York. And what made you move?
DC's for politicians and restaurant owners, really. We played enough there, you know. We played a lot in Washington. We had a hard time playing down there. We mostly played like basement parties and stuff like that. They actually banned us. Yeah. There was only 3 clubs at the time, and each club only knew each other. And we played at one club, and it's like, oh, you guys entice rats, and you make people jump up. In those days, it was pogoing instead of slamming, creepy crawling, and whatever. One calls the next one, and it's like, oh, sorry, guys, we can't play anymore. So we said, all right, we'll go up to New York.
This matters because even in punk and hardcore, racism and gatekeeping were real. They still are real. The last band I want to touch on is the Crass. Who technically weren't a band, but a collective of artists, activists, and musicians. Their politics were bold and open, proudly campaigning for anarchism, pacifism, feminism, and anti-capitalism. In a world where macho bands were glorifying war with destructive lyrics, Crass stood apart for asking questions and presenting history in a guttural way that made people think. Songs like Do They Owe Us a Living and Big A Little A showcased their politics of being anti-work, anti-authority, and being against systemic control.
Well, I first adhered to this philosophy, you know, from the roots of it were in my very, very early childhood of, complete disillusionment with the presented world. I was born during the war, the last World War. My father was away at war, so I never met him until I was about 3 or 4 or something. And, when he came, I didn't like him because I'd had a sort of nice relationship with my mother, which wasn't interfered by this man who suddenly came into my life. And he came into my, up until then, as far as I can't remember it, of course, but I was comfortable. I spent a lot of time under a kitchen table because it was safer from the bombs. But, you know, I mean, I was probably happy under the kitchen table, and then or in the arms of my mother. And then Dad turned up with tales of what he called the real world and tales of war, which he didn't actually tell many war tales. People were too busted or hurt or terrorized to ever be able to tell the real tales of war. But, you know, he was a very unhappy man, understandably. But I didn't understand that, understandably. You know, so from the start, I wasn't going to buy into his idea of the real world. And the crunch came when I took a book out of my parents' library. It was a black-covered book, and it was pictures from Auschwitz. You know, it was a book about the death camps. And it just was like a storm, you know, because I thought, that's the real world he's talking about, you know, all these bodies in a pit. And it terrorized me. You know, I thought, I can't live in that, I won't live in it. And actually, so that was the birth of how I think. I wasn't going to accept the world I was being handed because it was cruel. I could see that. I didn't need to look much further to see the cruelty.
The collective lived together in a commune where they dedicated the space and their lives to radical art and direct action.
Till Crass came out and actually gave us those pure anarchistic sentiments, the Pistols just vaguely, they talked about it, but it wasn't obvious in their lyrics.
They sell us love as divinity when it's only a social obscenity. Underneath, they're all lovable.
The people I was living with at this house formed part of the band Crass as well, so when Steve and Penny got it together, I came home to join them really as the visual artist for the band.
Shave women collaborator!
The band started and I wasn't in it, but I used to go along to gigs and the places would always empty out and I'd be like the one person pogoing in the front on my own quite often. But I found what they were doing was, I don't know, I found it very moving what they were singing about, and that they really, it seemed to be so felt and so meant. And the first thing I did with the band was a reading of Asylum, which was then not pressed on the first record, Feeding the 5,000, and they refused to press it. So it was called The Sound of Free Speech. And then I used to perform that. And then from then on I just got into doing songs, some which I wrote.
Well, I think quite rightly they thought it was another punk band, and when the band first started it wasn't as disciplined as it became. People were drunk and on stage and just... but I think... you know, gradually it pulled itself together and realised, you know, that it was a vehicle, a good vehicle to convey some of the dreams and aspirations that, you know, you yourself had, and just sharing some of the knowledge.
I believe very much in what we were saying, and felt that it was a good way of saying it to quite a lot of people.
Okay, old man yells at Cloud. Why does this history matter, you might be thinking? It matters because online discourse turns punk into aesthetic instead of practice. Punk is an action word. It's a verb. It's something you are, yes, but it's also something that you do. You are a self-starter. You are involved. You take action. That's punk. It applies to every area of your life and not just what you wear or what you listen to. Online discourse also erases the contributions of people of color, marginalized genders, and the working class. It's whitewashing the anti-racist organizing these musicians we all look up to did, and it treats anti-fascism like it's a new thing, when punk and skinhead culture was always anti-fascist at its best. ACAB is from an Oi song. Antifa is from punk and skinhead culture. Anti-racist action, Black Bloc, and all the others were born from skinheads and punks, beating up Nazis in their scenes and wanting to do something more about protecting their communities. Don't believe the hype. It's so important for younger kids to actually know the history and politics of their scene because punk was never just an aesthetic. Punk is about resistance. Punk was born out of a crisis, and people need to remember this. Just like hip-hop, techno, and all other subcultural movements, they are born out of economic collapse. state violence, racist and fascist organizing, and political disillusionment. When the world crumbles around us, we turn to art for support, community, and resistance. The fashion of punk was a symbol, but not the main point. When you strip punk, hardcore, and skinhead culture from its politics, all that is left is cosplay. History keeps you grounded. Knowing your scene's history connects you to a long line of resistance and gives you something to be proud of. No one caring about politics leads to no one caring about the scene or each other. I think it leaks into other things too. We have bookers throwing local shows with local bands, charging $40 at the door now. It's because they don't give a shit about you. You're not a part of their community, you're just a head count to them. When we connect as community, there are more free shows, more donation-based shows, and just cheaper shows in general. There are too many money-hungry grifters involved, and that happens when you keep collectively saying that our scene means nothing, it's just about the music. Shows don't have to be just shows, and bands don't have to just be bands. Rock Against Racism wasn't just a vibe to catch, it was an organized anti-fascist response to real threats that worked. The Clash just didn't write bangers, and they're not just an overrated punk band from way back when. They stood against racism, were politically vocal, and risked career opportunities and faced challenges over it. They had integrity. Bad Brains didn't write banned into DC as a metaphor. They were literally banned from venues for being black and loud at the same time. Punk wasn't always welcoming, and knowing that can make you a better ally and provocateur when you see shit in your scene that looks like it's repeating that same energy. If you don't know history, you can unintentionally recreate the same mistakes, which is happening all around us. Punk without values is a very easy thing to co-opt. The alt-right loves our aesthetics, and they love when subcultures use their politics because it makes them easier to infiltrate and grift. They see it as an opening to influence people on their side. When the National Front, for instance, came up with a political strategic campaign to go after white working-class skinheads to join their ranks, and yes, it was a political campaign they came up with, it was because skinheads looked cool. Skinheads were cool. They were the cool guys, and they were working class. So they drove a wedge between skinheads who were apolitical and mad about unemployment and turned them into Nazis. It happens all the time. It happens over here with the Klan as well. The Klan specifically looks for disenfranchised alternative people. The Proud Boys took the Fred Perry. They have none of their own aesthetic. The National Front and all of these groups need disillusioned, angry people, an army of them, who don't think politics are that deep. And they get them all the time. Nazis tried to take over the skinhead scene. Edgy brands use punk imagery to sell $800 jackets. And Paul Ryan thinks Rage Against the Machine isn't talking about him. Without principles, punk is just a costume. And anyone can wear a costume, even your enemy. That's why it's harder for younger punks to understand what is and what isn't fascist nowadays. Lace code is dead, yes, but I honestly think sometimes we need to bring it back. It used to be so much easier to tell someone's politics by band t-shirts they wore, the laces they wore, pins they wore, but now it's so much harder. Tattoos used to be a good indicator that you had music and politics in common with someone. Now cops have full traditional sleeves and back tattoos, so you have no clue. And I hate every second of it. Punk isn't about selling rebellion back to yourself. Punk is community. It's not a brand. So when you enter a scene, you have to understand that this is a living, breathing organism. Knowing the history and politics of the scene that came before you is about respecting all the elder punks and all the groundwork that they laid, some of which was paid for in blood, literally. It is also about understanding the why behind the shows, zines, and DIY venues. It wasn't just a place to hang out and get loaded. It never was just that. It's about showing up for people, not just being seen, which is why I stopped going to shows every weekend in 2014. It felt so manufactured to me at that point, and I've been retired. But it's so funny, when I saw Elon Musk Zig Heil on national television, I immediately thought about shaving my Chelsea again and reclaiming my sharp skinhead roots. I spoke to a few old friends about the Elon salute, and they felt the same way. We're unk now, unfortunately. And we have to make sure this scene is protected and safe. I've seen a revival all over social media, and it's exciting. I think it's the start of something beautiful, but we must stay vigilant. Punk right now is not just about the party, it's about the resistance. It's not about gatekeeping, it's about honoring the roots and protecting them so that we're all safe. The people want to see you, Ida. I'm old school in this way because I believe being a part of the scene means living the values. It's easy to look punk, but it's harder and more powerful to live punk. Organizing shows with DIY values and safer space policies. Speaking up when someone's being bigoted at a gig and not caring what they think about you for it. Supporting mutual aid programs in your city and raising money for it during a show. Building a scene for everyone and not just cool kids with money. This is what is valuable. Looking the part means nothing if you won't back it up when it counts. And this is when it counts, folks. The Nazis are back. So are we. There's been a disconnection from collective memory, a media environment that rewards ignorance and self-harm, and a system that profits from people being too uninformed to fight back. It's not that these kids are bad, it's that no one told them where this history comes from, and how if unchecked it can be used to degrade, dehumanize, and destroy people like them. They're playing with fire without knowing it's been used to burn down lives. And let's be honest, this generation didn't invent this shit. They're living in the fallout of 2010's irony culture where everything is a joke and nothing is sincere, the mainstreaming of cool girl misogyny and internalized racism, a culture that incentivizes educates and hate bait for views, and gutted public education and zero political education. They've been taught that the worst thing you can do is be cringe or too serious, so they turn away from movements like anti-racism or feminism, not because they understand them, but because they've been told it's embarrassing or over. Like, we don't have to fight racism anymore, it's over. We don't have to fight feminism anymore, women have equality. Type B. But they're not lost causes, okay? They're just disconnected, and it's our job now to reconnect them. We are the old punks at the show. I'm talking to millennials now. If you're 30 and up, we are the old punks at the show now. We have work to do. It's up to us to start bands, venues, and book shows. We have to make sure they know show etiquette and the real deal so they can create and build their own movements. I went to a punk show recently, and the younger kids who were there were staring at me crazy because I was slam dancing. We were at a hardcore punk show, mind you. They don't know how to mosh. We have to teach them. We literally have to teach them how to mosh. Somebody taught me, so it's not even like about being gatekeeper or whatever. Like, we're losing recipes. Not everyone will listen, but some will, and that's enough to keep planting these seeds. Because personal style is political. Style has always been about identity, belonging, and resistance. In a world pushing uniformity, whether through nationalism, capitalism, or internet trends, having your own look is a way to say, I will not be absorbed into this. When fascism says, be one of us, personal style says, I'm me and I stand out on purpose. People copy what works, the same face angles, the same audio, the same clothes, even in alternative spaces. Authenticity is punished unless it can be monetized, right? Being cringe is treated as the worst sin ever. Why? Because it's unpredictable. It can't be marketed. You can't buy and sold someone who is okay with the mistakes they have. But cringe is just another word for freedom. It means you're doing something earnest in a world obsessed with irony, detachment, and coolness. Fascism thrives on order, control, and hierarchy. So to be uncool and cringe is chaotic, joyful, but it's free. The more people blend in, the easier they are to control. Fascism wants you to be a cog. Your weirdness is a crack in the machine. Individual style says, I think for myself. I speak for myself. And that's dangerous to fascists. Capitalism and fascism both treat people as tools for labor and for war. When you choose your own style, your own voice, your own way of being, especially if it's not profitable or palatable, you're reclaiming your personhood, your artistry, and your autonomy. Aesthetic neutrality is a lie. There's no such thing as neutral style or apolitical aesthetics. Dressing normal is still participating in norms created by systems of power. Someone told you what that trendy thing is. Refusing to stand out can be another way of protecting privilege, avoiding risk, or ignoring injustices. Now, everyone can safely be visible, but if you can and you don't, ask yourself, who benefits from me not standing out? In a world trying to automate and militarize everything from your wardrobe to your thoughts, make weird art. Wear what scares them. Be the part even if they call it cringe. Live in color, sound, mess, and with your soul. Because that's what fascism fears the most. A future it can't predict or control.